Hello, today is August 21st, 2018. This is the standard SIG cluster lifecycle meeting. I had put a bunch of agenda topics that are meta topics to discuss today, and I was hoping that Robbie would join, but Justin is here, and he now works for Google, so I will proxy through Justin. So the first meta topic that applies to all of SIG cluster lifecycle is in a long time ago, many moons ago, there was an effort. I will spare the colorful things I would say about it, to add a bunch of teams to the Kubernetes repository, so that way those teams had the ability to see different aspects of things that were ongoing. And they tried to apply a standard label. There has been pushback within the community over time to try and eliminate those teams. We now have the ability to eliminate them, and I have a PR open to reduce it to 2 teams. One was just a standard notification for SIG cluster lifecycle, and the other is for PR reviews. I'll pause there to see if folks have comments with regards to that or thoughts.
Team.
Yes.
Fabrizio speaking. So we are going to use the standard team also for new feature proposal.
Yes.
Cap and everything.
Yeah.
Okay. Fine for me.
So I think it's a question if every single SIG should do the same for consistency.
I copied what other people are doing. So they broke it down to 2, and I think I want to break it down to 2 too, because there's a bunch of other ones that I don't even pay attention to, because there's just not enough time in the day.
So the other 6 are also removing everything but PR reviews in the default one?
Currently, from what I've seen, yes. So the way, yay, Robbie's there. So currently, from what I've seen, there has only been 2 remaining teams left from most other SIGs that have proactively done this effort. But I don't know if other people have other thoughts there. So I know you commented on the PR, Robbie.
Sorry, I just joined. Which PR are you talking about?
The community PR to reduce the teams to 2.
Oh, yes. There was an email that went out from the Contribex folks basically saying that we should get rid of all of the different teams and all the mailing lists. And I had assumed that meant all the teams, including that PR reviews one, but maybe for our own sanity, we want to keep that one around.
I copied what other folks have been doing because they wanted to have distinction for like reviewers versus everyone, because not everybody wants to review all the things. So that's kind of useful. But the other ones for like miscellaneous feature ads, yada, yada.
Okay. Yeah, if that's the pattern that other people are taking. It just, from the email, it sounded like we were getting rid of all of them. But if everybody's leaving one, then that works for me.
Okay. If folks want to, if you want to approve the PR, take a look at it. The PR is linked in the doc. The second meta topic, which will lead on to other things, is that this particular meeting, SIG cluster lifecycle, in the beginning was a bunch of federated individual things, and it's growing now pretty fast, right? Even faster than before. So one of the topics I wanted to broach here is that should we still continue to have this meeting on a weekly basis? And B, should this meeting be germane to only the group level topics that apply to other folks or might cut across SIG cluster lifecycle? Because we have office hours for all the different sub-projects. And I want to make sure that other folks don't feel that this particular meeting is dominated by topics that aren't applicable to them. So if people are interested in kubeadm, there's kubeadm office hours. If people are interested in cluster API, there's cluster API office hours. If they're implementing the AWS implementation for cluster API, there's a separate meeting for that. Thoughts?
I think there's definitely like PR discussions probably naturally belong in the office hours. I think if there's a kubeADM, for example, discussion that's more cross-cutting and higher level, then I think it'd be very welcome here, and we can sort of follow that sort of approach and see where we end up with where the time is spent, right? Like I certainly have been. I don't talk about like COPS PRs here because it's not of interest to most people, but we do talk about them in office hours.
I was wondering if it would also be helpful to have like status updates for the separate working groups and kind of subgroups within this meeting so that others don't feel the necessity to attend those other meetings just to know what's going on there.
Totally agree. One of the things I wanted to do is loop back into the fold now that we actually have a charter, which should hopefully be merged soon. Loop back into the fold some of the other folks like the KubeSpray folks and whatnot, so that they can have a venue to where we can cross over some ideas, and they can be welcome to join this venue too as well, because they're kind of in the incubator land, which is a kind of a holding zone for the time being, but I would like to loop them back into the fold and have a proper home and location for those folks.
Yeah, I also like with separation, like here we're SIG meeting for all the topics and then I separate office hours.
Do folks think that we need a weekly meeting for this? Or does bi-weekly work? Do they think half an hour? Because these are the meta topics that cut across. I don't think, in the past we've kind of dominated some of this conversation with kubeADM specific things, but I don't necessarily think that all the kubeADM topics slice across this whole group, right?
I think biweekly sounds better to me than half an hour. So I feel like if we try to do half an hour every week, we're likely to kind of push it over or get cut off. Whereas if we do an hour, I think that'll be easier to sort of maybe queue up more agenda items and time box things and free up more time on people's calendar.
Are there any complaints about this? I suffer from meeting paralysis right now, and I'm trying to shed as many as I can.
Okay, I saw lots of negative nodding for the complaint question. Go ahead.
I was just going to say it was recently brought up that in some cases, certain SIGs may be making too many decisions directly in the meetings. I was wondering if it would be helpful to propose it to the mailing list and provide a little bit of time for feedback.
Yeah, that was going to be my suggestion, is if there are no objections in the meeting, maybe Tim, if you could send something to the mailing list and say, we're going to vote via lazy consensus. Unless people object by X and such time, we're going to switch to biweekly. Right. So I've seen Aaron Craig is doing a great job of that. I see him sending emails to various groups saying, here's what I'm doing via lazy consensus. If people don't object by this time, we're going to move forward. And then when people don't object, he moves forward at that point. And I think that's sort of a good decision-making process. We give people this forum if they want to object in person. We give people the email form if they want to object asynchronously, but then we don't block for too long.
How does 1 week or 2 week timeout sound before I send out the email? 1 week, Robert says. So if we don't get objection from 1 week, I'm just trying to plan for next week because I don't think we'll get the calendar updates in place. So if there isn't objection, we could probably punt this meeting next week if that's, provided that's okay with people. Or maybe we'll just hold it one more time and then punt. So I'm going to skip the next topic because that kind of overlaps with some of this. I'm going to remove that one. So the next one, Richard.
Yes, this kind of spawned from my kubeADM PR, but now actually I think it might be something that can cut across a few other things. With this SIG cluster lifecycle stuff, I'd like to see if we can come up with a kind of standardized way for dealing with configuration files. with our various bits and pieces. Specifically, one which is sort of distribution friendly, coming from the OpenSUSE point of view. So, like one thing I'd like to see in KubeADM and elsewhere would be having configuration files distro packageable living in like USR, which then get augmented or overwritten by user configuration files living in ETC. So you have this way of, you know, a distro being able to roll out, you know, COBS, KubeADM, whatever, with the distro defaults, and then, you know, have the user overwrite that willingly, happily. So I just wanted to kind of bring that idea to the table and see how many people I could scare in one go.
Now, this is part of the grand unified component config. So, but it's one part of it, right? Like the problem that we currently have is that the configuration for the different components is different, right? And not unified. And there is a merged proposal that exists where people are currently working on it to try and get consistency across all of these separate components. And part of the work in at least KubeADM for the time being is to break apart the configuration into separable chunks, where those chunks are softly referenced from one another. So that way you can have a way of having similar configuration file, similar-esque configuration files that you can have throughout your system, instead of having like these half-baked artifacts of system to unit files for some stuff, and then you have, you know, some configuration for the other things, and some of those things were conflating before. So the work is ongoing, and folks are aware of some of it, but we've not talked about applying that grand unified component config to other areas.
Well, is there another issue at hand too, and that if I'm understanding your request correctly, that would also require kind of merging of config as well, wouldn't it?
I'd like to talk about that. Yeah, I mean, merging or tiering. So, you know, you could have a situation where the distro provided config is just providing like the starting point, and then if a user provides a different config, then, you know, all of the distro config doesn't apply. You could go, like, to take like the system D example as a wonderful one, you know, go for a fancy sort of layered model of things like selective drop-ins of certain parts, but that's, yeah, something to talk about and think about, and that's what I wanted to kind of raise here.
Yeah, and the only reason why I asked that is because I don't think the component config addresses anything related to merging config at this point. I think that's something that's been deferred upstream for a while now, up until now.
There is a separate issue in the KubeADM repo that overlaps with this topic that I would like to make sure that is addressed by it. And we need to come up with a proposal for unification for how we deal with command line arguments, component configuration, and overriding system stuff, right? But we need to actually deal with this. Probably, I would like to have a proposal maybe within the 112-ish, end of 112-ish timeframe, or beginning of 113. I can cross-link against your issue if you want to do that, but I think the best way to handle this specific topic is to break down some of the requirements in detail and come up with a plan of action that hits everybody in a proposal.
Sounds good. I'll get started on that then.
And Richard, particular to your pull request, what you linked into agenda, the biggest problem is not the splitting of configuration files, but the problem is what we have two entities which tries to configure one component. You have kubelet arguments which comes from your package, and we have a KubeADM which also expects to pass some kubelet arguments. So if we find a way how to distro can produce the defaults to KubeADM, that would be a lot better than just trying to sneak in some parameters to kubelet.
Yeah, I mean, what I've done today in Cubic, which kind of takes the issue off the burner for now, is having packages manhandling etc sysconfig kubelet. So, kubeadm is reading that from its systemd unit file. When Docker is installed, it'll be pre-populated with the Docker parameters. When cryo is installed, it'll be pre-populated with the cryo parameters. And it works. It's potentially messy and fragile, and it will all fall apart horrifically in the future, but it's a starting point at least, while we work on the sort of bigger, longer-term problem.
Yeah, but still, even if you prepackage something, you have a possibility to either kubeadm command line arguments or through kubeadm config to actually have it conflicting values.
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
Yeah. That's my point, actually.
Yeah. That's where like having a decent strategy for how to tier these, how to have some hierarchy and structure, and then we can at least document that and say, okay, this is the order of precedence. This is how things will work. Because it all seems a little bit random at the moment.
It totally is, and that's part of that. There are meta topics that address these things, but I do think we should have they address pieces of the puzzle, but some of those pieces are currently in flight. So I think if we have a grand unified field theory of what we want, I think it's the timing is fortuitous, right? Because these other pieces are moving finally in place, right? Next up, is there anything else with regards to that topic?
Nope, that's perfect. Thanks for giving me the lay of the land.
Yeah. Next one, Mohammed. Are you on?
Yeah.
Okay.
So for those who don't know who I am the current CI signal lead for one under release cycle, and we have close to a close to finish of the release cycle, and we have tests that are currently failing for some time and need to be fixed. So I've already linked those tests there. Like there's the kubeadm thing which has been failing for a while now, and there are also multiple upgrade tests that have been failing for some time. So it would be good if we can get eyes on those and get those things sorted.
Lubomir, I know Lubomir had been working on some of those. Do you have a status update for some of that?
All right, so the first one I can fix pretty easily now that we have the Kubernetes Anywhere change with the branch. So the other one is very weird. We have daemon sets related issues in a bunch of different tests, and they are not related to Kubernetes commits or test infra commits. So my only other guess is something GCE related, because I have no idea what else could it be.
I can dig into that one. I'll take a look at the second one. With regards to Kubernetes Anywhere, my hope, I wanted to get this done over a long haul. My hope was to get that replaced with cluster API implementation. I believe the objective is to get cluster API to alpha in 1.12, right? At the end of 1.12 cycle?
That's the hope. We'll see if we make it.
Okay. And my objective is, I'm going to race you, Robbie. If you don't get the GCP version in place for the testing stuff, I will happily get the AWS version in place, and we'll throw down to see who gets there faster, because the pain of this is never ending.
Yes, I agree. Yeah, maintaining these upgrade tests are a huge time sink.
Yeah. Okay. So the issues are there. It would be good, like if we can get comments on that, so that we know the status there, so that we have a log of the thing. So that'll also be nice.
So in terms of the upgrade tests, like I already spoke, I already made a comment to Mohammed about this. If we get some sort of an expert from GCE who can look at the tests, like what are these daemon sets failures? If he can debug it locally, we can get a feedback, because like going to all the six and saying to look at the tests, I feel like there is a unified problem underneath all the test failures, you know?
So Are these new test failures in addition to the known test failures that we had that were related to persistent volumes not being in use?
So looking at test grids, some of these started failing around early August, and there's like no particular reason here. We also, I think there are, it's not only a daemon set issue, there are other problems as well. So,
these are GCE tests too.
Yeah.
I'm looking at, these are the stuff using /cluster.
Yeah, so the cluster lifecycle specific failures are all daemon set related. But there are some SIG storage issues in there. And yeah.
Do the kubeADM upgrade tests work fine, or is it just the GCE specific ones?
I think it's only the GC. Let me check quickly.
Rock, paper, scissors, Robbie. I don't.
I'm trying to look at them right now. Hold on.
Yeah, typically, for what it's worth, we don't. Unless it's kubeADM specific stuff, the legacy cluster stuff we've deferred to GCE folks.
Yeah, maybe I should poke the folks in the SIG GCP, so it's not just me doing it.
Yeah.
Tim, did you also subscribe the SIG to like the reports for test failures?
I had a branch created for that, but what I wanted to make sure we did too, as well as like this specific issue, although SIG cluster lifecycle is quote unquote responsible for the umbrella of some of these things, SIG cluster lifecycle, other than like GCE folks, no one within the SIG actually owns /cluster anymore. So that should actually be routed differently. And we should probably go forth and update the routing for some of this stuff in the tests. So that way it says GCE or GCP or whoever's this appropriate sub-project /provider is. So I think those are two work items that make sense.
Yeah, I think that's not a bad idea because, like you said, routing to this group is almost in some ways routing to a black hole because it's, if I notice it and I can find someone else at Google to work on it, whereas if we route it to SIG GCP, then presumably more Googlers will notice, and we can also sort of put more people's feet to the fire about getting rid of the cluster directory.
So should the cloud provider tests be like first delegated to the cloud provider folks and then delegated to individual SIGs for like fixing individual tests?
I think what Tim is saying is that there are a lot of places where the sort of roll up of a test suite comes to SIG cluster lifecycle that should be changed to SIG GCP. So like I'm looking at the first one that was linked in the bug, which is GCE new, master upgrade cluster new, and it's the overall test is failing. It says SKU test is failing. It says SIG cluster lifecycle is responsible for the upgrade. The cluster should maintain a functioning cluster during upgrade, and SIG apps is responsible for daemon set upgrade. So when I look at that, I think that the overall thing is probably failing because the SIG apps test is failing, and the SIG apps folks should probably look at why daemon set upgrade is failing. If that gets fixed and the overall one is still failing, then it should probably be SIG GCP instead of SIG cluster lifecycle to debug why that's broken. Is that sort of along the lines with what you're thinking, Tim?
Yep, that's exactly what I'm thinking. Is the order of routing is incorrect.
Okay, I just verified the other upgrade tests, and those are failing because of the Kubernetes Anywhere change.
Okay, that we can fix. Hopefully, if we have someone to merge your changes.
Yeah.
Is there anything else? Any other tests failing we should be aware of?
Not at the moment, but I'll definitely bring it up if I find anything else failing. Right at the moment, this is what is failing, which I think is, which I thought initially was cluster lifecycle issue.
Okay, you cut out there for a second, so I'm guessing we're done.
Yes, sorry, I'm just looking real quick. It seems like a couple of them we have the daemon set issue, maybe the same underlying problem. There are a couple of them that look like they're failing sort of consistently with something from the storage team about NFS volumes. And so we should poke them about looking into that one.
Okay.
Yeah, so as far as I know, Mohammed is going to join all the SIG meetings this week, like talk people about it.
Yeah.
It has to be done.
Yeah, I will take an effort to take a look at those tests and try to PR the tagging that we do inside the tests so that it gets routed a little bit better. Perhaps we can do an ordered layering thing. I have a SIG testing meeting that I have to go to later on today, and I can discuss that with them too as well. So that way tests can get routed properly.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
Sounds good.
All right. Last agenda item that we have, too many meetings. Yeah. Fabrizio, deprecating self-hosting.
Yes, so at the beginning of the cycle, we decided to deprecate self-hosting, but we never decide exactly how to do this. And so I have two options. First of all, I think that from V1.12, we should make user not capable to create new cluster with those flags. So basically hide the flags. And this is the first piece. But the most critical part is how to manage existing clusters that are using those feature flags. I have two proposals. The first one is to block on update. So basically, we are removing this an alpha feature, and we don't allow upgrade even if we are giving a short notice or not notice to the users. The second one is to give a warning and but allow upgrades to 1.12 and then block in the next cycle.
I'm okay with blocking so long as there's a breadcrumb that says the generation of the configuration manifest can be done here, and you can crib or modify your manifest accordingly. So for background and history here is that inside of kubeadm proper, there was two paths. One was static manifest and one was self-hosting. And inside of the code base, there is a bunch of switches that internally happens, especially on upgrade, that does A/B versus static manifest versus self-hosting. And the objective of what we talked about and discussed several times is that we have taken on a bunch of technical burdens trying to get self-hosting to a point where everyone was happy. And it was one of those efforts that just added more and more complexity. And the cost of the complexity that added up over time was not worth the benefit or gain, because we could do it in a separate layer, in a separate tool, in a separate step, right? That separate layer or tool could be cluster API upgrades, or it could be a separate pivoter that could do these things, but it doesn't need to be managed by kubeadm. So that's the background of why we're trying to do that. And I'm okay with blocking the upgrade with enough breadcrumb information, but that's my take on it. Other folks have other thoughts?
I guess the other thought is, does this sort of signal that the SIG is sort of moving away from the self-hosted model? So I know, like, hearing from the folks at CoreOS, they've moved away from the self-hosted model. Talking to some folks from SAP, they're working on Gardener, they've moved away from the self-hosted model. It seems like this is signaling that kubeadmin is moving away from the self-hosted model. Is that sort of a trend, like in terms of like the cross-cutting things across multiple parts of the SIG? Is this just we want to move it up a layer, but we still believe it is a good model in which to run things? Or is this sort of our way of saying, maybe this is not the right way that we think we should run clusters in the future?
I think it is okay. I mean, there's cost benefits for this, right? And I don't think it falls cleanly into bucket A versus bucket B. I think for specific user stories, it makes a ton of sense, but I don't think kubeadm should own the complexity. And that's the choice that we were explicitly making in the beginning of the cycle, is because as we started adding these other features like HA capabilities native into kubeadm proper, it complicates the upgrade scenario and the master joins or the control plane join scenario. So by eliminating that complexity, it simplifies kubeadm, and you can defer that effort into a separate tool. And we don't think, if there's demand for that tool, I think that pivoting and management of generating the manifest and then making the manifest look like self-hosted manifest could be done by anyone. It doesn't need to be done by, it can be done with other people who have interest or want to do this effort. But that also defers a lot of the other complexities that we had in the past with regards to, what happens with the single node failure scenario.
Just to add a little bit of context on the cubic side of things, behind the curtain, because we haven't really announced any of this publicly, we are looking at a self-hosting solution using kubeadm, but then with our external tooling that we're currently working on and with our sort of external approach. So, the kubeadm vision of not doing self-hosting itself and then expecting something external to handle the magic fits in exactly with the direction we're currently playing with. You'll see more about it if it actually works.
Just so you're aware, self-hosting we've played with this idea for a very long time, and it is fraught with peril.
Yeah, we're well aware of that. We've seen what you guys have been doing. To be honest, inside the team, there's a bit of a split. I'm very much on I don't see the point. I'm kind of with you guys. But, we have others who are far more keen about it. So we're experimenting with both in the project, and, we'll see who survives.
Yeah, I think deferring is having a layered model for these things actually helps to reduce the complexity of every tool. And it falls in line with my purism of Unix philosophy. So
there are a couple of different ways of calling self-hosting. Actually, I've seen on the internet. One is like system disk services versus the static pods. People call this self-hosting as well. The other self-hosting we're talking about here is the one that you run the control plane into daemon sets.
Well, so, it's more than that, but you're running Kubernetes on Kubernetes, and you can get one layer deeper than that by running kubelet on kubelet, that's an extra layer of complexity.
Yeah, I just wanted to make this clear for Richard, if in case there was some confusion.
Nope, all clear. Thank you.
Does anyone have thoughts with regards to hard stop on upgrades versus just a warning message? Or
if we give a warning message because someone's self-hosted, what's going to happen when we actually try to upgrade? And do we want to test that scenario? I mean, certainly it's easier to implement a hard stop than to try and basically flip them back out of the self-hosting mode and make sure that actually works.
Yeah, we don't even have test coverage over the self-hosted solution at all right now. So providing the warning to me seems like we're going to warn you that you're about to shoot yourself in the foot.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was wondering. Is it, if you want to continue, you're going to break your cluster, or you can't actually do this, right?
So Liz did some investigation on the topic in terms of the fork deprecation policy for these. And since these are alpha, the API machinery folks told us that we can pretty much do an action required not in the release notes and remove them right away. But of course, Fabrizio brought the topic that these might break existing clusters in terms of upgrades. So that's the whole discussion here about how do we proceed.
I'm fine with doing a hard stop on upgrades because it was an alpha grade feature. And because we reserve the right to defer alpha grade things, we can do it. I'm okay with that.
So Lee, I know you mentioned previously that you knew of people that were actually using the self-hosted feature. Does that sound reasonable for the use cases that you're aware of?
Somebody can send a message to Mike at Ocado and ask him what he and the teams there are doing. They have their own run books in regard to managing the manifests and pivoting control plane in different failure modes. They honestly, they are the authority that I am aware of on self-hosted Kubernetes at scale with multiple clusters. And Mike has said in the past that they would like to get into these meetings, but they haven't done that. So I would say that they can be their own owner of that, and we can discontinue the feature. And if they show up, then I would be happy to entertain, actually supporting it for a wider community. But it makes sense to me that we would just provide a release note that says, hey, we're not supporting this anymore. Since we have no owner, no technical owner, no user in regard to no feedback loop for any self-hosted bits.
I agree.
So is that enough to get going, Fabrizio?
I mean, let's limit this to maybe a minute.
Fine for me.
But like, what would you have to do in order to take a cluster and pivot it back into a static manifest supported cluster?
Basically have a tool that does what the internal portions of kubeadm does to pivot the manifest from a static manifest to a self-hosted one. That pivoting code could be excised into a separate tool. And you could basically pipe the output from Gen into that separate tool. And if we wanted to, we can even put that tool in the kubeadm repo.
So can't you just use an old version of kubeadm? Do we have a phase for the reverse pivot?
No.
You see, that's the problem. We never did that. Okay, cool. Well, I mean, people just have to undo their thing, and whether or not we want to document that, I guess, is the question. So, yeah, we don't need to write a reverse pivot. Unfortunately, we don't have one. So that seems to be a little half-baked.
Yeah, so they opted into a feature that was alpha. So
yeah, I'm cool with it.
Are there any other topics? Going once, twice, 3 times?
I guess I have a question.
Go ahead.
I never get to see like Robert Bailey and stuff anymore. So like Justin SB is on here as well. So you guys are working with clusters in different contexts. Does anybody here run the metrics server in production?
Oh gosh, I mean, we might in GKE. I haven't been following closely what the logging monitoring folks are doing. I'm not the right person to ask about that. But if there's a SIG for Logmon, they would probably know, the Google folks from there.
I ask because I know, well, like HPAs work on GKE, so you must either be using Heapster or metric server. And
we've been running Heapster for a long time, and I think they were planning to switch to the metric server, but I don't know where they are in the transition, if they're actually running in production yet.
Cool. Okay. We're just trying to keep it on our radar because this is going to be something that we're probably either going to have to document somewhere or eventually provide support for in kubeadm or some other cluster lifecycle tool.
Nope. This gets into the add-on app space. If we want to get into add-ons and add-on management for second layer order things, I'm pretty opposed to some of these things. We can always defer to the other SIGs. Like we would gladly defer to well-documented location from SIG cluster lifecycle and say like, okay, your control plane is now stood up and you want to add these other things, go there. Because that story shifts and changes and is inconsistent with across providers. So I would much rather go and defer on that to well-documented location, kind of like how we're trying to push SIG Cloud to be the aggregator for cloud provider integration. So they are updating the documentation there, and instead of us trying to own all the integration pieces, we are simply going to defer documentation of how you change things in that location.
Cool. Okay. Well, I have a task this cycle to update our add-on stocks to basically point over there, since we don't have any mechanisms to support that right now. So that sounds like that would just be more a permanent solution.
And as far as I know, the whole add-ons folder is being deprecated or something.
Yeah, the reason I ask is because like we're all cluster operators here in addition to software people, and like that thing is just, the docs are not really existent yet, and it's kind of jank. And just curious to see if anyone else had stories with it, because we ended up deploying it. And, also, kubectl is just like missing a bunch of stuff related to there, but that's like in SIG CLI stuff. So
sometime at a KubeCon or whatnot, I'll happily trade stories about my colorful opinions with regards to metrics integration, but not on a recorded meeting.
You gonna put that on the calendar, Tim?
Sure.
Yeah. All right.
Last chance, group topics. Going once, twice, 3 times. Okay, thanks everybody. I will send out an email with regards to potentially turning this to a bi-weekly meeting.